Good afternoon to our distinguished members of the Advisory Committee on Transportation Equity, to our guests in the room, to our guests online. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our launch meeting of the Advisory Committee on Transportation Equity. We are honored that you would spend time with us, and especially honored to those members who are joining us at this table for the launch of this important committee. My name is Irene Marion. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the director of the Departmental Office of Civil Rights here at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Our mission is rooted in the principles of equity and inclusion, and the Advisory Committee on Transportation Equity is a pivotal table and instrument for realizing this work and mission. The purpose of today's meeting is multifaceted. First, we will aim to discuss the Advisory Committee's mission and the role it plays in the work that we are doing here at the Department to advance transportation equity solutions. This meeting serves as a platform for meaningful discussion and collaboration involving not just our committee members, but also the broader community and members of the public. We will explore the comprehensive work that we have carried out as a department to date and begin to discuss the role that this committee will play to advise the Secretary and the department in the work ahead. Once again, I want to thank you for joining us. We are here to do the work of the American public. And there's no better person to start us off in this meeting than a champion for the people and a champion for transportation equity. I'm pleased to introduce Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who will open today's meeting.
Oh. Well, thank you, Irene, for your introduction, for your great work, Christopher, and all of my colleagues, many of whom are joining, for what you have done to help bring us to this day. And most importantly, thank you to each of the members of this advisory committee for taking on this responsibility for this public service. Thank you in advance for the sprint we are going to ask you to undertake and the work that it is going to entail. It is incredibly important. And I want to say a special thank you to my predecessor, Secretary Anthony Foxx, somebody who both by means of his advice and counsel and by way of his example has made me a better secretary and this a better department. And we are very much in his debt in many ways. And of course, it's fitting that he is chairing this committee since he is responsible for creating it under his leadership when he was leading this department. He is somebody who paved the way, pun not intended, but I'm sure he, like me, found you can't go very far in this line of work without a transportation metaphor crossing your lips. But really paved the way, opened these paths that we are going down now, laid out topics that were at the time considered novel, maybe even newfangled, and to some who were not thoughtful enough might have been considered extraneous to transportation policy, but which we rightly recognize are at the very core of doing our work well. So I want to thank and acknowledge Secretary Foxx for everything that you have done during and since your tenure here at the department and leading this committee. Likewise, Stephanie Gideby-Jones, fellow charter member of the Difficult to Pronounce Name Club, like me, your leadership and your experience is going to be incredibly important to us, as is that of each of the members of this committee, some of whom I've had the chance to work with before and some of whom I'm just getting to know. I find myself from time to time being asked by skeptical members of the media or elected officials what equity even means. And in the course of answering that question, always return to the touchstone of fairness, which is also one of the basic values that we guide our work by here as a department. And it's especially important to pay attention to fairness for those of us who have worked in transportation enough to be conscious of how transportation plays such a huge role in whether people can prosper, what kind of places you can work, what kinds of places you can live, whether you have access to basic necessities like healthy food and medical care, what kind of education is available to your kids. These kinds of things very much depend on your access, your equitable and affordable access, your safe access to transportation, or the lack thereof. And it's why the work of this committee is so important, focusing on how to build and establish safer, cleaner, more accessible transportation systems that do, in fact, connect people, not divide them, and that do so in ways that leave nobody behind. It's especially puzzling that some of those who are skeptical of the importance of equity in our work are from areas, sometimes rural areas, that will stand to benefit from your work. Every gap, every unfair gap, whether it be between black and white, between the disability community and the rest of the traveling public, or between rural and urban, can be addressed through this work. And I believe, given the proportions of what we are building under President Biden's leadership with the infrastructure law, that future historians will be able to write about this period, the 2020s, and say that the proportions of that work and the intentionality around how that work was done is part of why in the 2020s we saw those gaps begin to close. That's what success looks like for our country if we get the 2020s right. And a big part of that has to do with transportation. And of course, even a superficial attention to the history of civil rights and the struggle for justice in this country would leave no room to ignore the centrality of transportation to that. The Montgomery bus boycotts, to take just one example, being one of the signal events in the struggle for justice and equality in this country. So under President Biden's leadership, we are determined to build transportation networks that work for everybody, both in building them up with good paying jobs that are available to people whether or not they have a college degree, but that require skill and require access to building those skills, through affordable public transportation that connects people to opportunities, and through smart and responsible investments in every kind of community, rural and urban, black and brown and white, rich and poor. Every corner of this country deserves equitable access to transportation. Now, in our discretionary funding, we are combining unprecedented levels of investment with a focus on making sure that those investments reach the very communities that have been left in the past. For example, we recently announced our latest round of awards from the RAISE program, formerly known as BUILD, formerly known as TIGER, totaling over $2 billion. And 70% of the projects that we funded were in historically underserved communities, like Orangeburg, South Carolina, where we're building a new bridge and a transit hub to connect two HBCUs to the downtown business district. We made progress on road safety, mindful of the reality that black and native and Latino and rural communities are experiencing the highest rates of traffic deaths in the country. So through our National Roadway Safety Strategy and new programs like our Safe Streets and Roads for All grants, we're improving safety along some of the most dangerous roadways in the country, like Roosevelt Boulevard in Philadelphia, where we're helping to install dedicated bike lanes and building new medians and upgrading traffic signals. And we've launched completely new initiatives, like our Reconnecting Communities program, which looks specifically at those neighborhoods and those places who have been divided by the transportation decisions in the past, and funds community-driven efforts to reconnect them to jobs and opportunities, like in Buffalo, New York, where we're helping to cap part of the Kensington Expressway, which slices like a gash through parts of Buffalo, moving it effectively underground, and then creating new crossings and park space on top of it. And it bears mentioning that the Reconnecting Communities program was created by a bipartisan majority in the United States Congress under President Biden's leadership, and that when we do this work, it makes everyone better off and it makes nobody worse off. No one alive today is necessarily responsible for the origins of the inequities that we have inherited. But everybody who is alive today and in a position of responsibility is accountable for what we do about them. That's why we are here. And that's why we're undertaking this kind of work. And that's where you come in. The 24 distinguished members of this group were selected from nearly 250 applicants. You represent an enormous concentration of intellect and experience, some of the best minds in transportation from the private sector, the advocacy world, from labor, from academia, from every level of government. You are experts in design and planning, in policy and organizing, in community engagement and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and accessibility, and we're depending on that expertise and depending on your unique perspectives to help this department to make the most of this once-in-a-generation opportunity. So you will be asked to document the realities that are around us, to deliberate bold ideas, to consider new strategies, to bring us real examples of where our work is helping and of where we need to do better. And we're asking you to consider what type of infrastructure we should be building for future generations, not as a theoretical exercise about what might be, but as a very real opportunity to shape very real work of proportions that we've not been able to do in our lifetime. It won't be easy. We are working to change patterns of exclusion that have literally been cemented into American life for generations. But if we get this moment right, we will be creating new opportunities, creating new wealth, and breathing new life into communities that will benefit from it for many generations to come, because that's how long infrastructure decisions last. So I want to thank you again for being here today. I want to thank you for lending your talents to this incredibly important work. And on behalf of the President, I am thankful for your invaluable contributions. And on behalf of myself and the department, really looking forward to our work together. And with that, I'm very pleased to introduce again our Chair, Secretary Anthony Fox, and our Vice Chair, Stephanie Gedeby Jenkins. Thank you for your leadership. And I'm looking forward to seeing where you take this effort.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. This is a momentous moment for the country, for this department, for this committee. And we thank you for your leadership, Mr. Secretary. We know we owe you a piece of work in the relatively near future. We will work as hard, as expeditiously, and as well as we possibly can to deliver that product to you, sir. Thank you. I'd also like to say that as chair of this committee, I have the pleasure of working with Stephanie Gedeby Jenkins. I can't believe I said Jones. We had a Stephanie Jones who worked with us at the time, so I apologize. Stephanie is a leader in her own right in this space, and has, from the time we worked together in the department to now, has become a leading light in this arena. And I'm really grateful to spend the time with you, and to Director Marion, to Deputy Administrator Coates, to all of the DOT team. Thank you for what you have done and what you will do to stand us up. I think we're going to move now to introductions of the committee. I have some remarks that I will offer after that, but why don't we begin with the introductions? I don't know, Madam Vice Chair, if you'd like to say a few words. Okay. Why don't we move then to the introductions, starting alphabetically. Which direction? Maybe here. We'll start with the folks in the room, and then we'll move to the screen. We have a few members who are joining us virtually.
Thank you. Isema Gibbs. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility for JetBlue, and I reside in New York.
Thank you. My name is Jin Zhang. He, him. I'm a transportation planner. I work for the Mercantile Monongalia MPO, West Virginia. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Oliver Sellers Garcia. I'm the Green New Deal Director and Senior Advisor to Mayor Michelle Wu in Boston. My background is in city planning and public administration focused on climate change, and prior to that I was the Director of Resiliency and Equity for the MBTA, Boston's transit agency. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Phil Washington, the CEO of Denver International Airport. Happy to be here and looking forward to the great work that this committee will do.
Good afternoon. I am Prashanthi Raman. My pronouns are she and her. I am the Vice President of Global Government Affairs at Cruise, the self-driving company, and I am located in the Bay Area and really look forward to productive sessions and months ahead together.
Good afternoon. My name is Tanya Smith, and I serve as the North Carolina Department of Transportation Civil Rights Director and also lead their diversity efforts. My pronouns are she and her, and I hail from Raleigh, North Carolina.
Good afternoon. I'm Vince Malone, Chief of Staff and Administration for WeGo Public Transit. My pronouns are he and him. We are located in Nashville, Tennessee. Glad to be here. Looking forward to the work ahead.
Hi there, I'm Yochai Eisenberg. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago in the Department of Disability and Human Development, and I use he, him pronouns. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Diana Mendez. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the corporate president for Infrastructure and Mobility Equity at HNTB, based out of Arlington, Virginia, and thrilled to be here and get to work with all of you fabulous minds.
Good afternoon. My name is Priya Sarthi Jones. I'm the Deputy Executive Director at the Fines and Fees Justice Center. My work shows up at the intersection of enforcement and traffic, and I'm really happy to be here today.
Good afternoon. My name is Ezekiel Rich. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm Executive Director of Performance Management representing the Great New York City Department of Transportation.
Hi, I'm Camille Williams, Director of Social Responsibility for the Transportation Diversity Council, and I am coming to you from San Antonio, Texas.
Hello, Charles T. Brown, founder and CEO of Equitable Cities, pronoun he, him, his, located in Somerset, New Jersey. Pleasure.
Good afternoon. My name is Destiny Thomas de Guzman. I'm the founder and CEO of the Thrivance Group. We're based in Los Angeles, California. My hometown is Oakland, California. And I'm also a graduate of Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, and honored to be serving as a part of this group.
Good afternoon. My name is Ebony Wimbush. I'm the president and CEO of Airport Minority Advisory Council, also known as AMAC. I reside in the Washington, D.C. area, and my pronouns are she, her.
Good afternoon. Flora Castillo, president of Pivot Strategies. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I come from the great state of New Jersey.
Howdy, everybody. I'm Greg Winfrey, CEO of Texas A&M Transportation Institute and a former assistant secretary who had the pleasure of working with Ms. Gideby Jenkins and Secretary Fox. Pleasure to be here with you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And we have some virtual members of our committee, or members of our committee who are virtually present. Let me start with Andrea. Are you there?
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. Andrea Marpilero-Colomina. I'm the Sustainable Communities Program Director at Green Latinos. My pronouns are she, her. Coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, and very excited to be joining all of you on this committee. Thank you.
Okay. Clarence, are you there? Diana? Okay.
Hello.
Is that Clarence?
Yeah, hello. My name is Clarence Daniel. I'm Community Development Division Director for AVCP, the Association of Village Council Presidents, the largest tribal nonprofit in the nation. One of the programs I oversee is Tribal Transportation Program. And we have 56 tribes in our region here. So, I'm glad to be aboard.
Thank you.
And I'm located in Bethel, Alaska.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. Priya. Oh, you're here? Okay. Sorry. I didn't know if there was. Roger.
Greetings from the other Washington. Roger Millar, he, him. I am the Secretary of the Washington State Department of Transportation, and also this year I have the honor of being the President of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. Thank you.
Thank you. Shoshana or Veronica?
Hey, good afternoon. Veronica Davis, Director of Transportation and Drainage Operations for the City of Houston. Also the Vice President of the National Association of City Transportation Officials and recent author of Inclusive Transportation, a Manifesto for Repairing Divided Communities. My pronouns are she, her.
Thank you very much. That is our group, and we have a few members who I think may be joining in the midstream, whose names I've mentioned. But let me just say again, thank you to the DOT team, to our consultant team for all of the work that's gone into bringing us here today. And thank all of you, members of this committee. Many of you traveled great distances to be here, and it is indeed a pleasure to have you here. There is a bit of deja vu as I remember sitting in this building several years ago in what I call the prehistoric days, when we were thinking about how to get greater input into what a transportation equity system should look like. And indeed, what precisely is transportation equity anyway? Typically, we've defined this term by negative reference. That is, by pointing to examples of inequity, we presume that there is a more equitable way to build infrastructure in America. This administration, led by the President and this Secretary and this capable DOT team, are challenging themselves, they're challenging us, and ultimately the country to consider what a positive and reparative construction of this term can mean. Now, the idea of transportation inequity is not wholly irrelevant. It can have many forms. A distinct category of families in urban and rural America dispossessed of property in place after place after place to make room for new transportation facilities. Or a person who struggles with physical challenges who cannot find adequate transportation to a grocery store or to a doctor's office. Indeed, there can be physical structures and operational or programmatic components of this problem. And so at this table, we have perhaps the most comprehensive community of experts, advocates, thinkers, and doers on the subject ever assembled. And our task is nothing short of trying to help this administration and future administrations get this right. For reasons I'll mention later, this work is not going to be easy. I think the Secretary's already alluded to it. We face enormous time constraints in which to do the work. We have a very large committee, each of us with distinct voices, and we want all those voices to be heard. And then there's the matter of the larger community of America, in which there is a public record, there's data, and there are actually people who are still among us who lived through some of the decisions that we will ultimately discuss. So, what are we hoping for here? What am I hoping for? First, when we know better, we can do better. We must look to help ourselves and the larger community of America understand what brought us to this place. In fact, I hope the work of this committee becomes the gold standard for establishing the why. I mentioned this a few minutes ago, but in May of 2020, most Americans, regardless of their political persuasions, looked with horror at the killing of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officers. A generation ago, an event such as that might have happened out of the view of any camera. And in the absence of visual evidence, we might have been given to debate. Some who consider themselves more law enforcement oriented might have come to the defense of the police officers in their recollections. Criminal justice advocates might have taken the side of the many observers who saw the act of brutality in real time. But the camera removed all subjectivity. We can't take an iPhone back to the mid-20th century. But we can do our best to capture why this issue matters, why this administration has placed so much energy and attention on it, and why the promise of our democracy depends in part on correcting past mistakes. Transportation errors, as all of you know, can last a long time. Our responsibility will be not to engineer history, but to tell it as pure and straight as it can be told, to create a written camera, so to speak, using the public record, using first-person interviews and archives and the stories of Americans who remember what happened, perhaps to their own families, when possible. And where there's no such evidence to be found, we should say so clearly and unequivocally. Where such evidence exists, we should be just as clear. And where we can document patterns and practices that happened in place after place after place, we should identify those as areas of particular ones to be addressed, either by this department or by other stakeholders. Second, the administration has wisely sought outside perspectives to help them carry this work forward, and perhaps to establish a living record of actions that are working well, others that maybe need to be improved, others that may not be working or effective at all. They have asked us for a checkup. And as we examine the approaches this administration has undertaken, I know we will be crystal clear about what is working, what can be done better, and what perhaps doesn't need to be continued. We may critique the administration sharply by virtue of this work. But before that comes to pass, let it be said that I believe that is a strength of this administration to ask for this type of look and not a weakness, because the work itself is already hard. And what they're simply asking for through this committee is a perspective on how to do hard work better. As a result of the time pressures, we may offer a series of rolling recommendations. Instead of waiting until the end of the report period, we may find areas that we agree on and have consensus around and want to just put those forward so that they can go into process and perhaps even have an opportunity to be deployed before the final report comes out. That is one particular way we may choose to work. And then finally, third, the U.S. DOT, as powerful as it is, does not have plenary authority over the nation's entire transportation system. And I think that is an important point. I hope we're able to amplify that and make it clear in the report. In fact, most dollars that come through the department flow directly to states. The decision-making about projects rarely, if ever, sit exclusively within this department. And going back to the earliest days of federal highway investments, for example, the culture of congressional statutory action in federal administration has been more of deference to states than command and control. And so it is ironic to think that as National Guard troops were stepping in to protect students who were integrating schools in the South, the federal government was also deploying large sums of money into the transportation system that could have, in effect, destroyed the homes of those very students. In my view, it would be a mistake not to issue recommendations that spoke to the entire ecosystem of transportation. That is to say, this department has a certain set of functions, and we are being asked to critique and offer opinions about that. But there is a Congress that provides authority to this department. There are states that are very much involved in how the infrastructure gets built out. There are local governments. There are even private sector actors that in some cases have a significant role to play. And so I hope our recommendations speak to the ecosystem on this issue and not just this department. So I hope this is the longest you hear me talk the entire time we're together. I'm not a big talker. I tend to like to weigh in when needed, but I felt that you needed to hear from me kind of where my head is coming into this work. We do need to work efficiently. We're on a time clock to produce a report by June. We appreciate all of your patience as we try to use all manner of tools to help us move that work along expeditiously. The rolling recommendations is perhaps one way to do it. We will have a subcommittee process, most likely, that will help do some of the work. We may occasionally poll the committee to try to get a sense of the committee to maybe speed up some of the conversation that might have happened otherwise, so that we can spend the time that we have talking through the most difficult and thorny problems. But at the end of the day, I think this report has an enormous opportunity to speak to a department that is still working through these issues, but also to speak into the future of our country. Thank you for your service, and let me turn it over to our Vice Chair.
Thank you, Secretary Fox, and I also want to just thank Secretary Buttigieg for his leadership in this moment. One of the things that I was sitting with was actually a conversation that I had at the start of this month, where I had the privilege of going to the Sioux Tribe Nation and being in Standing Rock. And the conversation that we were having was one where they were talking about what does investment look like 7 generations out. The policies that they're putting in place today, they recognize will have a lasting implication for several generations to come. And as we think about the work that we are getting ready to embark on, I'm also holding the past legacy in which we stand on. Oftentimes people don't draw the connection of civil rights and transportation, but the reality is when we think about the fundamental laws that have governed our nation, it has been on the basis of things like Plessy versus Ferguson. I was thinking about our trip to New Orleans, where we met with the family of Plessy and Ferguson and the foundation that they had. And we were there with the mayor at the time, Mayor Landrieu, who is now leading the infrastructure investment that we talk about at a magnitude that we may never be able to understand. And what was powerful about that conversation in the room was, though their family names have been one that have been the baseline for why we have separated ourselves, even with a narrative around separate and equal, but the reality of the lived experience of people never really sat in that truth. And in this moment, as we think about recommendations that we want to make, who I'm ultimately centering are those who are living and having to utilize the transportation system each and every day. Not just through our highways, not just through our transit system, but even in the basis of where our natural resources flow in our pipelines, how we travel and what that means. One of the people that I was also thinking about was Angela Glover Blackwell, who was one of the first and original members of the committee. And she often talks about something called the curb cut effect. She talks and points to the history of the American with Disabilities Act, the ADA, and how that was a law that was meant for one group, but that today all of us benefit from it. If you're a mom, you know what it looks like to push that stroller up a curb versus a curb cut and the difference that it makes for all of us. And it's that example that I think about when we talk about what equity means, that we can center the who have been most negatively impacted by past investments and how we can actually rectify those situations even up to today. It is an opportunity to document the past, but also sit in the magnitude of this moment and all of government approach to really think about the investments that we are making and ensure that we are centering those who have not been part of that conversation. I am deeply encouraged by the leadership in this administration. It is an honor to sit here with Director Marion and Assistant Secretary Coase. Some of the things that I was holding was also just the reality of what it means for us to really think about the future that we are getting ready to live into. When I think about reconnecting communities, what I actually think about is Miss Cecilia in Philadelphia, an Asian American woman who chose as a librarian to go and fight against the Vine Street Expressway that was going to take out her neighborhood. I was thinking about Mr. Marvin. It's beautiful now for folks to talk about Rondo, but when he would send emails and letters asking you, Secretary Fox, to develop a program that would ensure that every place counts, we were one of the first to go out across this nation. We went to places like Spokane, Washington. We went to Nashville. And we had the conversations with real people to talk about what does it mean to reimagine your infrastructure to work for you. And so though the 24 of us who will be helping to lead this work are just an example of the thought leaders that we have across this nation, I also want to offer the invitation to the public, because you hold a level of expertise to the recommendations that we need to also be elevated up in this moment. And we are deeply grateful for the service of each of the committee members who are serving in this moment, but also those who will tell their story boldly. I will close my thoughts in just the reality of what infrastructure investment means in place. As we are sitting here today in a building that has been renamed for both Secretary Coleman and Secretary Mineta, secretaries whose legacies we really do stand on in many ways. I think about our 30-year plan that Secretary Coleman said we needed as a national vision for the nation, and how Secretary Fox, you asked that we also had a plan. I think about Secretary Mineta and his leadership in Congress, but his ability to document history and what needed to be in place to repair past harms. And I think about Navy Yard as someone who lives in Washington, D.C., married to a fourth-generation Washingtonian, now thinking about the legacy of our future, and how this investment that the General Service Administration made in placing DOT physically in Navy Yard changed the fabric of this neighborhood. And that when we invest, particularly with transportation dollars, communities are transformed, hopefully for the better. But it also means, and at times it has been at the expense of harm. And so this is an invitation to also think about how do we both repair past harm, but how do we build a more just and equitable future where we all thrive? I look forward to embarking on the conversation and what we may be able to put forth. Thank you, Secretary Fox.
Thank you. We now turn to really getting into the deep dive on the ACTE Charter. I'd like to turn it to Administrator Marion.
Thank you so much. Before I start, a bit of housekeeping. I have received a message that communicates that the accommodations for our online viewers has not been working. So a commitment that I will make, of course, we made those plans and they fell through, but we'll make sure that as we post the recording of this meeting online next week, that the closed captioning and the ASL interpretation will be embedded into that recording. So I want to offer my sincere and deep apologies that we could not make that happen in the live streaming of today's event. We want to take a moment, if we could go to the next slide, we'll come back to the rest of the agenda, but want to take a moment to draw your attention to the charter that is available online and will be available on the ACTE website with this meeting and the documents that relate to it. Just to talk a little bit about the purpose of the work of this committee and how it will function. Next slide. My notes are out of order. I'm going to just go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the main purpose of the charter is the main component of the charter is the objective and scope of activities of the committee. This section of the charter states, the committee will provide independent advice and recommendations to the secretary to inform the department's efforts to implement the equity action plan and strategic plan of the department. I want to draw your attention to the language specifically that the objective ensures the independence of this committee and the inclusion of external experts providing advisory services to the Department of Transportation, which Secretary Buttigieg highlighted earlier. This independence ensures that the ACTE's recommendations are grounded in the best available expertise and not influenced by governmental entity or bureaucracy when providing advisory information and recommendations to the department. The advisory committee members are representatives of their communities across the nation and are leading national experts. Recommendations and the biennial report. The ACTE will submit a comprehensive report to the Secretary based on the independent advice and recommendations. This report will identify priority activities within the agency, evaluate their impact on advancing equity, and provide recommendations to further promote a more equitable transportation system. This biennial report will be a roadmap to progress. And finally, the Advisory Committee on Transportation Equity is accountable to the Secretary through the office directed by the Secretary, which is the Departmental Office of Civil Rights. And this accountability underscores the importance of the work. It means that your recommendations have a direct line to the highest levels of government where they can shape policy and initiatives and drive real change. In conclusion, I want to share that the Advisory Committee stands at the forefront of addressing equity issues in our nation's transportation system, as you've heard from our leadership, making recommendations and facilitating partnerships that promote equity, inclusion, diversity, and accessibility. Together, we are shaping a transportation system that serves all Americans, regardless of their background or circumstances. I want to thank the members again for your commitment to being a part of this table and to the vital mission of equity work across the department. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Christopher Coase, the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Transportation Policy, who will talk a little bit more about the department's equity progress to date. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene, and again, welcome to all of you for joining this kickoff. As Irene mentioned, I am Christopher Coase. I currently have the privilege to serve as the Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy here at the department, but also have the honor to work alongside Irene to serve as the department's co-lead on our equity work on behalf of the Secretary. Let's go to the next slide. As you all are aware, equity has been an administration priority since day one. Most recently, the President issued a second executive order furthering advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government only reinforces its continued importance. Year one, here at the Department of Transportation, we took several significant steps in response to the President's and as the Secretary Buttigieg's call to advance equity. For the first time, the Department of Transportation centered equity as a department-wide strategic goal. This was and still is a critical step into institutionalizing equity across the department's policies and programs. with the aim of eliminating inequities across our entire transportation system and the communities they serve. Next slide. Because of that, we have now set very ambitious goals in our initial equity action plan under 4 key pillars: our wealth creation, power of community, expanding access, and proactive intervention, planning, and capacity building. We began working on the initial plan in the early days of this administration. Then President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as the recent Inflation Reduction Act, fortified this effort by making historic investments in transportation sector, improving public safety and climate resilience, creating jobs across the country, and delivering a more equitable future for all. I think we all will agree that this is an incredible opportunity to shape how these investments are made and to make sure that everyone, and we mean everyone, truly benefits from them. Next slide. We are really excited about the progress that we have already made toward our equity commitments and across our implementation of both the bipartisan infrastructure law as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. We have been truly engaging communities across the country to understand their unique needs and how our programs and policies can help them thrive. When you look under wealth creation, we've now exceeded our goal of U.S. DOT's direct contract dollars to small disadvantaged businesses in FY22, and we are poised to try to exceed that in FY23. When you look under our proactive intervention planning and capacity building pillar, we successfully launched the Thriving Communities Program, which is providing place-based, hands-on support to underserved communities using Department of Transportation investments. We've now awarded over $885 million to disadvantaged communities as part of our Reconnecting Communities pilot program, which are providing planning and construction grants to help communities who have been burdened by past transportation infrastructure decisions. When you look under our pillar of power of community, we've released a guide on promising practices for meaningful public involvement in transportation decision-making for funding recipients. Under expanded access, we successfully launched the Equitable Transportation Community Explorer tool to help localities, community groups, state DOTs, transit agencies to better understand where transportation insecurity is most acute and begin piloting the use of how we can bring overall across the country the cost of transportation in households through our screening of future transportation grant programs. Next slide. The first DOT Equity Action Plan, which was released in April of 2022, was developed in consultation with the public, experts, and DOT leadership and staff. In December of 2022, we established for the first time ever the DOT-wide Equity Council chaired by the Secretary, which oversees the entirety of DOT's equity work and the process of institutionalizing equity at the department. In June of 2023, we invited the public to comment on our work and how it has impacted their organizations, their communities, as well as we are seeking major input in our metrics, our data sets, our tools, our research to measure and advance transportation equity. Next slide. I just want to say major thanks to many of you who have been participating in our public engagement process throughout this year. We just submitted the department's 2023 Equity Action Plan to the White House, and we look forward to sharing with all of you and the public later this fall. Meanwhile, we will continue to implement our commitments and continue to work towards institutionalizing equity throughout the department as broadly as depicted in the slide that you see here. Next slide. Finally, I want to just provide a quick insight into our internal processes to inform the committee how they may interact with DOT going forward and ensure that your recommendations that you'll be developing reach not only the Secretary, but all of the senior leadership of the department, which I'm very pleased to see many of my colleagues are here today. The members of our DOT Equity Council includes modal administrators, leaders within the Office of the Secretary, and also the career members of the Senior Executive Service from each of the operating administration and OST offices. They are supported by career equity leads who meet regularly and track DOT commitments across a variety and various administrative priorities. We are committed to creating and constructing and sustaining a relationship with this advisory committee. So I can just say we are really looking forward to seeing your recommendations as soon as possible. So with that, we are really excited about the future of this committee and what you will do not only within the next year, but how it will shape transportation policy, investments, and our communities to come. With that, again, thank you for the opportunity to be with you, and I'll turn it back over to our chair, Secretary Fox.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Coates, and thank you and your team for all the work you're doing as well. We will now, I know this is a lot of stuff coming at you. I promise our future meetings won't have all of, we'll be interacting a little bit more, but we've got a lot of stuff to kind of put out on the table. The next thing to put on the table are the committee's proposed focus areas and approach to recommendation development. So I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chair Gideby Jenkins.
As we can. Okay. So as we continue our conversation around the ACTI's mission, we wanted to share with you the focus areas of ACTI and the critical factors that serve as our guiding principles. These factors represent the very essence of our commitment. Wealth creation, really looking at how we build capacity, expand business networks, attain new skills, experiences through increased USDOT contracts. It signifies the department's unwavering commitment to creating opportunities and prosperity for all, particularly those who have been historically marginalized. The committee will focus on contract equity, which signifies our commitment to ensuring that contracts for transportation projects are awarded fairly and equitably. Historically, disadvantaged businesses have faced barriers to accessing these opportunities. Our committee is dedicated to removing those barriers and creating a level playing field. Through contract equity, we can channel resources and opportunities where they are most needed, fostering wealth creation within these communities. Another area under this focus area will include disadvantaged business enterprises. The disadvantaged business enterprise holds a central role in our mission. It is designed to provide support and opportunities to businesses owned by individuals who have been historically, socially, and economically disadvantaged. By promoting and providing recommendations to the DBE program, we aim to facilitate wealth creation through increased access to contracts, skills development, and business growth. The other area is procurement and how contracts are awarded, how businesses are selected, and how opportunities are distributed. Our committee is committed to advocating for transparent, fair, and an inclusive procurement processes. This ensures that businesses, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, have a fair shot at securing contracts and, in turn, building wealth within their communities. Wealth creation is much more than financial gain. It's about building robust, self-sustaining communities. It is about empowering individuals to attain new skills, forge new connections, and gain valuable experiences through increased USDOT contracts. It's about opening the doors of opportunity wider to ensure no one is left behind. The next area is really focused on intervention. Interventions represent a commitment to historically overburdened and underserved communities in both urban and rural areas, ensuring that they benefit from a generational investment in our nation's infrastructure. It's about providing direct, hands-on technical support for transportation projects with local impact, creating pathways to prosperity for communities that have long deserved these opportunities. The committee will focus on capacity building. Capacity building means empowering communities with the knowledge, skills, and resources they need to actively participate in the transportation projects that affect their lives. Their capacity building will enable, through capacity building, we enable individuals and communities to make informed decisions and actively engage in shaping their transportation future. It's about turning communities into active agents of change. Safety and mobility justice. Safety and mobility justice are foundational to our mission. We are dedicated to ensuring that every individual, regardless of their background, has access to safe and reliable transportation. Justice compels us to address the disparities and the inequities that have long plagued the transportation system. It's about rectifying past injustices and ensuring that everyone can move freely, safely, and with dignity. In summary, interventions represent our unwavering commitment to tangible, on-the-ground action that benefits overburdened and underserved communities. It is about more than just infrastructure. It's about building capacity and fostering justice. Power of community. This focus area embodies the belief that individuals and communities should have a greater voice in the transportation decisions that affect them. It's about ensuring that the very people who rely on our transportation system have a seat at the table and that their voices are heard. The committee will be focusing on public involvement. Public involvement signifies our dedication to fostering a dialogue where diverse voices are not just welcomed, but encouraged. It is about creating spaces where communities can actively participate in the decision-making process surrounding transportation. By engaging the public, we ensure that their needs, concerns, and aspirations are considered, making our transportation systems more responsive and equitable. State and local power. Recognizing the importance of state and local power is essential in shaping transportation policies. It is about empowering states and localities to have more significant say in determining their transportation future. These regions understand the unique needs and challenges of their communities, and by granting them more authority, we enable tailored solutions that better serve those who rely on our transportation system. In essence, the power of community is about democratizing transportation decisions. It's about shifting the balance of power to ensure that the very people who use our transportation system have a meaningful say in how they are designed, implemented, and improved. Finally, expanding access. This focus area is centered on increasing social and economic opportunity for disadvantaged and underserved communities. It envisions a future where affordable, multimodal transportation options are not just a means of getting from place to place, but a catalyst for social and economic growth. The committee will focus on two major areas: economic excellence, which signifies our commitment to ensuring that transportation isn't just about mobility, but about economic prosperity. It envisions a future where affordable, multimodal transportation options are not just a means to getting from place to place. Economic excellence signifies our commitment to ensuring that we are driving progress, job creation, and community development. And finally, economic mobility. Economic mobility means providing individuals and communities with the tools and opportunities they need to move up the economic ladder. Affordable transportation options are a lifeline for people seeking employment, education, and a better life. By improving economic mobility, we build and break new cycles. We break the cycle of poverty and build new areas of opportunity to ensure that everyone has a chance to reach their full potential. Expanding access is more than just transportation. It's about social and economic transformation. It's about creating a future where every individual, regardless of their background, can access opportunities, job, education, and essential services through affordable transportation. We cannot move forward without acknowledging the injustice of the past. It is essential that we confront and rectify past harm, recognizing the historical inequities that have persisted by addressing past harm. We pave the way for a more equitable future. This committee, in putting forth its recommendations, will look both at the past, present, and future as part of those influencing factors. Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and thank your voice as well. I know that was, I'm sorry, that was a mouthful, but you did a great job. What I think the idea here is the sort of categories that the department has laid out in terms of their prioritization create sort of a nice framework for us to borrow in terms of structuring our report. So it doesn't mean that we're bound to just what the administration is doing necessarily, but it's a good architecture for us to utilize as we do our work. So that's kind of the idea that Stephanie has just shared with us. And if that's acceptable, we can always kind of adjust as we go along, but I think it's a good starting place for us. Let's go to the next slide. There were, in any group, there are going to be some rules of the road, some kind of like covenants that the group makes to kind of ensure that we can get our business done. Our team has drafted some proposed rules of the road. We're not necessarily adopting those today. In the interest of time, I think it would be great if these can be distributed to committee members and offered for feedback back to the committee. And if we can do that, that will allow us to turn to the next category, which is equity and transportation. And I think Lisa Lynn Jacobs and Tanya Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Lynn Jacobs. My pronouns are she, her. I'm one of two senior advisors who have the privilege of supporting the work of the advisory committee. I am going to facilitate a few questions for the committee to engage with the chair and the vice chair. And then I'm going to turn it to my colleague, Tanya Lovelace, who will facilitate any questions or comments that the public may wish to share. So while we're doing the first part of this engagement with the committee and the chair and vice chair, if you have questions or comments, please be thinking of those. So for the committee, the first question is, as you think about past, present, and future realities of transportation, what should this committee consider and emphasize in terms of equity? And feel free to raise your hands and be recognized. And at that point, once I've recognized you, feel free to press your on button so you can speak.
I'll break the ice. Again, my name is Destiny Thomas, and I think the past informs the present when we're thinking about this question. Something that comes to mind for me is, the quiet part that I don't think we said today is that we really do need to consider what these interventions look like from a reparative standpoint. Not reparative as in just repairing what's broken, but reparations, and what that looks like from a land use and transportation planning perspective or standpoint. I think the huge umbrella of past harms includes the genocide that was visited upon indigenous people in this country's origin, as well as chattel slavery. And as you mentioned earlier, we could go on and on about the myriad of things that have happened as a result of those two occurrences. But I think what's really obvious is that transportation today serves commodification and productivity. It's about money in a lot of places. And so if we're talking about repairing past harms or thinking about what to do with the present, a lot of the inequities that we see will not be resolved through innovation until we've taken the step to right those wrongs. And so considering the relationship between commodification and transportation, and how do we directly place some of those resources back into the hands of descendants of those atrocities, I think is a huge step, but one someone has to take at some point in the near future.
Hi, Priya Sarthi Jones. I think for the past, present, and future, at least the perspective that I bring to this conversation is one in which sort of enforcement shows up in the world of transportation. Most of my background and work has been inside of the criminal justice system, but transportation is one of the primary leaders of how we get people from freedom into a justice system. And our roadways, our transportation systems are often built without sort of thinking holistically about all the pieces and where the dominoes sort of fall. And, we are a punitive country. We're a country that thinks about how will people comply with the laws that we have laid out. But really what we're looking for is how do we get buy-in into society participating in the way that we would all like us to be. And that really doesn't come from an enforcement-led angle. That comes from building trust with communities. That comes from understanding how we got here. And a lot of traffic enforcement is playing a role into how we build this pipeline into prison and into our jail system. There's actually a really good book called Jails and Cars that really talks about how these two things go together. And I think addressing that, understanding how we have policed, specifically Black and brown bodies through automobiles and transportation, and how that has sort of led us to the system that we have here. And as we think now about building infrastructure and putting all of these investments in all of these places, that is coming with a lot of conversations around enforcement. Right? How will we enforce these awesome bike lanes? How will we enforce these bus lanes? And it is coming with economic sanctions in communities that can barely afford to keep the lights on and the rent paid and take care of their children. And when finances become the measurement of accountability, those with the least will pay the most. And I think that that conversation is often missing from the transportation lens, and really thinking about that now. And you mentioned the, sort of 2020 George Floyd events and how that has really, I think, caused a lot of groups doing a lot of different work to examine what part they have played or their work has played into systems that they don't normally even think about how they interact with. And I think it's important to explore that, to name it, to call it what it is, but then identify our path forward and where we'll go. Because from what I can tell, our past and our present are very similar, but that doesn't mean that our future can't be very different. And that's sort of where I would like us to head and really think about in this space. Anything we come up with, anything we recommend, is enforcement a part of that? And what does that look like? And how can we reimagine enforcement? And how can we think about the underlying causes of why people may be not following the rules, not doing what we're asking? And are there other solutions that are not about enforcement that can get us to what we're looking for?
Great, thank you. One moment. I see that one of the members who is with us virtually has a comment. I don't know if she needs to be unmuted, but go ahead, please.
Thank you. I was going to say, as we look at the past and the present, some of it is coming down to we're still making the same decisions that we've made in the past. I know that we've talked about highways, and I know many of us are aware of the history of highways cutting through neighborhoods. However, we're still allowing highways to cut through neighborhoods, and highways that have already created a scar, they're now being expanded. And so we're traumatizing the same communities over and over again. And so some of that it comes down to the tools. We haven't changed the tools that we use to assess our projects. And I know for many of the states, it can sometimes be challenging to break out of the silos of the different modes, and to be able to, as you think about expanded capacity for the future, it tends to focus on just, motor vehicles. And there's a disconnect somehow between the FTA process and the FHWA process to truly consider how you can add capacity without necessarily adding lanes, by having more HOV and by having just higher capacity vehicles. And so I think we haven't necessarily advanced the tools and the regulations to get us overall better outcomes, because our highways are extremely important parts of our commerce now because of the way we've built things. But I think as we look to the future, how we can use our highways in a different way, that we can allow for more public transportation, whether it's buses or otherwise, as we think about facilitating movement into the future as populations continue to grow. And so I think that that's, it's a FHWA and FTA really being able to somehow streamline that process for how we plan and how we look at the future of how we utilize our highways, and then not excluding freight in that conversation as well.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself before you begin your response.
Yes, my name is Jin Zhang. Since we are talking about the transportation future of equity, I'm thinking about transportation goes beyond connecting. No, transportation is connecting people, not only moving people. The roads and parkings hold a large tons of right-of-ways, and it is a place for people to connect. And I imagine in the future, transportation is more about supporting very good land use, supporting people getting together, place making, even beyond something like that. So that's my thought. Thank you.
1 second. Please.
Yes, Phil Washington, Denver International Airport. This was mentioned, I think, a little bit earlier, this idea of looking at transportation systems 7 generations out. The idea, what's in my mind is the idea of an unconstrained look at how transportation systems should be, and considering the mega trends that we see coming, considering climate change that has a disproportionate impact on underserved communities, looking at rapid urbanization that we see coming, people coming to urban cores all over the world, actually. And so the idea of looking and thinking about a transportation system and looking at it in an unconstrained way, what is the ideal transportation system that we see? Sort of an unconstrained look. That's what appeals to me. All these things coming together in an unconstrained kind of way. What do we think this thing looks like, regardless of money, regardless of anything? Dreaming is what we're talking about here, right? Is what appeals to me.
Yep, this is Yochai Eisenberg. When thinking about the past, present, and future, what came to mind was the built environment and the way it was designed in an inaccessible way for people with disabilities. Thinking about how it was designed for essentially white, able-bodied males. And this created, right, the impetus for why we had the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act that became, part of what helped address that inaccessibility. But with that, I think there was still kind of this idea of what disability is that we need to expand. And so I think we should think about understanding a diversity of disability that recognizes multiple types of disability and the design that excludes different kinds of people with different disabilities. I was walking around the building today and checking out some of the intersections, as I like to do, and of course saw some crosswalk signals that you could press that are supposed to have auditory signals, and I was like, oh, I was very excited. I pressed them and they actually didn't work, or they were very low. It was a combination of both. And then on the next street there was not any crosswalks with signals. And I bring that up in relation to kind of thinking about the present, where we have this just hodgepodge of accessibility, which leads to just non-connectivity of accessibility, and which has also led to this really conflictual environment in many communities where people with disabilities have been bringing major lawsuits against cities and transportation agencies for their lack of progress in making accessible environments and transportation systems. And on the other side, you have communities who are trying to comply but not doing enough. So I guess my point in thinking about enforcement and what you were talking about is, in this case, I think enforcement may have a role, and maybe the department could have a role in thinking about enforcement in new ways, or potentially thinking about other levels, other carrots and sticks to use that could move the needle to addressing this conflict that exists in the reality of what people face.
Thank you. Are there remaining answers to this question? We can take one or two, please. And please try to keep your answer relatively brief.
Thank you.
My
Isema
apologies for
Gibbs.
saying that midstream.
Isema Gibbs. One of the things I think that we have to think about as well is health equity, the lingering health effects that transportation initiatives have on communities. And we haven't really discussed that much, but I think there is so much to talk about as it pertains to systemic health issues that happen around certain types of transportation initiatives that happen over and over and over again.
Excellent. I see we have another member who is coming in virtually who wishes to respond. Please introduce yourself and share your response.
Thank you. This is Roger Millar, and I think it's really important as we look at the past, as present, and the future, to remember that transportation isn't an end unto itself. It's a means to a lot of things, to economic prosperity, to social equity, to environmental justice, to the things that matter to our communities. And when you look at the past, the actions of transportation agencies in the past did not happen in a vacuum. They're not happening in a vacuum today, and they won't be happening in a vacuum in the future. And it's really important that we remember that, and that we are not alone in our ability to do harm or our ability to do good. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody like to have the last word on this first question? Thank you.
Hi, Flora Castillo. I want to piggyback on the health equity component of it and health disparities. When I think about the past, present, and future, I think it's important for us as a committee to double down our efforts in ensuring that we're centering the voice of those communities that are impacted by, the efforts that we do implement. I spent my career in healthcare looking at the intersection of access to, food, healthcare, and housing, and thinking about considering how transportation and the work that this committee will have an impact on the social drivers of health is something that, will have immense impact years to come.
Thank you. In the interest of including the public voice here, I'm going to turn to my colleague so that she can facilitate some questions and anything else the public wishes to share. But the aspiration is that there will be more opportunity for committee dialogue shortly. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tanya Lovelace, and I am Senior Advisor with ACTE, and really grateful to be here with all of you. Excited to hear from the public today, and want to share just a couple of thoughts ahead of time. We just want to ensure that, that you focus your questions on what was discussed today so far. Also, we encourage you to make your questions directed to the Vice Chair and the Chair, and then they will help to direct the questions to the committee. And then just want to emphasize limited time. We want to hear from as many of you as possible. And then lastly, really ensure that you introduce yourself before you speak, so that we can know who you are and have your voice amplified. So whoever would like to come first, please feel free, and the microphone is here for your access. Absolutely. And then if you would like for anyone in the audience would like the microphone to be brought to you, please also let us know if that need is if you have that need for support, and we're happy to support that as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Jack Nierenberg. I'm an undergrad and a transportation advocate from New York. And I remember you mentioning that the public is so important to really make sure that the public is engaged through the whole process. And I'm wondering, is there any idea at this point as to how exactly that will be done? How exactly the public will be engaged or involved with the committee?
Thank you for the question. I think first and foremost, this portion of the meeting is part of the idea of doing that, and I think it'll be a practice that we will try to continue as much as possible. There is also active discussion within the committee of doing field hearings, so to speak, out across America to hear voices from other parts of the country, so that people don't feel like they have to come to Washington, D.C. to be heard by this committee. And then I think the third level is we will look at ways to use technology perhaps to create intake systems for input that come in from the public as well. I don't know, Vice Chair, if you want to add anything. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Good afternoon. My name is Victoria Johnson. I'm a Global Equity Director with HDR Engineering. Thank you so much for assembling on this important topic. A question I have with regards to addressing past and previous harms, would like to know if the recommendations will include considerations of how we mitigate opinions that feel as though that acknowledgement should necessarily be something that we do. For example, I work in the private sector with public sector agencies, and sometimes there is resistance, as you know, in terms of acknowledging how transportation has impacted communities in terms of redlining, urban planning, and the like. So as we move to develop solutions that are more people-focused and inclusive, would love to know if the recommendations will also provide some guidance in terms of how you mitigate different positions and perspectives on what that looks like at a community level.
It's a really great question, and I'll try to answer, and Vice Chair also, please jump in here too if you wish. First and foremost, I think as I'm sort of imagining the report, I think it has to delve into kind of a comprehensive exposition of the why, as comprehensive as we can be. There are anecdotal stories out there. There are even studies regarding specific communities that exist in literature. But I'm not aware of a work that sort of strings together the combination of practices, policies, and so forth that historically weighed in on communities and the impacts to those communities and the real people who were affected by decision making. The point isn't really to beat up on different modes of transportation, so to speak. I think the point is that we live with those decisions today, and to the extent that there is documentation of it, that those decisions created real harm. And people aren't making this up.
Right.
Because I think once you can establish as objective a case for that as possible, I think we have a chance of, for lack of a better word, depoliticizing it. You know, I don't think, owning property in this country is, it's one of the bedrock principles of the country that when you own something, the government has to go really far before it takes it away from you. And there were rules put in place that were subsequently struck down by the Supreme Court in some cases, subsequently changed by congressional action, but there's real questions about whether people were, for example, compensated at fair value for property that was condemned. And so how much of that can we unpack, I don't know, but the point is, if you believe in property rights, you believe in freedom, you believe in capitalism, then you have to pay attention to this, because you can't have a capitalist system when you have these sort of externalities that play in and prevent people from exercising their rights in a fair way. So anyway, the point being, I think there's a lot of stuff there. You also have the administration is actively working on what may be termed as a positive or remedial vision of the country. How do you fix it? Okay, fine. Whatever happened, happened. What happens now? What does that look like? And, I think Mr. Washington sort of put his finger on, we can think about what the infrastructure should look like, but what should the policies, practices, procedures look like? What would, if you closed your eyes, what would be the fairest, most sensible way to set this system up so that it not only created the throughways and the throughputs, but it created a sense of fairness and shared prosperity as part of that. So I think if people will give us a chance to produce the report I hope we can produce, I think it will say everything that needs to be said. And I think last thing I'll say is that this is probably the most political thing I'm going to say. Staff, don't worry, I'm not going to create any problems for you. This isn't a Democratic or Republican issue. It is not a Democratic or Republican issue. Democratic and Republican administrations helped to create the problem we have. And we need Democratic and Republican administrations to help us fix it. So when the Secretary was talking about the durability of this, I think that's kind of what we mean. We want equity to be a permanent part of the way infrastructure is thought about.
Thank you. Thank you. We have time for one more question in this segment. Is there anyone else in the audience who has a question? Absolutely.
Good afternoon. I'm Naveen Lamba. I'm with a firm called Guidehouse. My question was, equity is a pretty complex, multifaceted thing. And while we are looking at it from a transportation perspective, there are many other dependencies, both that transportation needs to get support of and vice versa, where other efforts going on in other domains need a lot of help from transportation. So is there any thought, or how do we engage with some of those other domains so that the outcome is the best possible?
What I'm grounding in is that systems are made up of people, and there are inherent responsibilities that we all have in those said systems, but that people and communities often don't live single issue lives. And so that when we are talking about transportation, it is an intersectional, connected, bridging opportunity to bring in conversations around health, around climate, and around the lived experiences that people are feeling each and every day. And we have to be concise about what we are going to focus on and how we move towards what recommendations can look like. And so the framework for the focus is really being able to build upon what is already happening within the agency, but also holding a broader context and going beyond the federal to state and local and other areas of opportunities. If you have specific recommendations for areas that we should consider, this is an invitation to the public to bring forth those recommendations. While I have the mic, I also just want to affirm that the goal is to really think about what are things that we can institutionalize even today for this conversation that will offer the systemic change that we need for tomorrow. So as we invite the public and also the advisory committee members to really think about what we can put forth as our document holding the past, present, and future, it is also an invitation for us to really think about what steps we need to take collectively. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so just we want to share our appreciation for all of your questions. Your eagerness that you bring is the same eagerness that we bring back to you. We encourage you to please go to the ACTE website to learn more about this committee, as well as to go to the equity page that's on the DOT site to learn more about the equity work. And without further ado, I will pass it back to my colleague, my fellow senior advisor, to continue the conversation with the committee members.
Thank you. I wanted to give the committee a very brief final opportunity to share what are obviously your initial thoughts, but since we had to pare this session back, the question that we would like you to respond to, and super briefly so we can get as many of you in as possible, and starting with those of you who have not had the opportunity to share, is what critical messages would you like the Secretary and his staff to take away? Alternately, if you have thoughts about what you would like to see the department doing more or less of, feel free to share those, but please be brief.
Hi, thank you. Oliver Sellers Garcia from the City of Boston. I just really want to recognize and appreciate how many times you've mentioned state and local partners. I obviously speak as a local partner from a municipal government, and there's two things that I want to highlight. One is that, you know, cities are really leading on climate change and environmental justice, but even those of us who are very proud about our leadership are in an enormous phase of transition from organizations that have been all about raising the importance of these issues to actually getting the work done. And that is, has many implications, but one thing that I want really to highlight is that we're going to be doing things in a new way on equity and climate, and taking advantage of federal funding and DOT support will mean some risks, some unusual proposals, and I'd really like us to create an opportunity for local partners, those who are leading and those who want to lead, to really have some opportunity to explore and bring unconventional ideas. The second is that even in a state like Massachusetts, in a city where we're so aligned, to move on climate and environmental justice, we're dealing with transit and transportation systems that are not in municipal control. And as cities, we have the opportunity to bring a lot of leadership, but need guidance and support on more alignment in, you know, all of these different jurisdictions. I also want to recognize an earlier comment from the Vice Chair about actionable recommendations. So I would like to set the challenge for us to give recommendations on those two topics related to cities that really are things that we can move the needle on quickly. Thank you.
Please.
Tanya Smith, North Carolina Department of Transportation. So Chair and Co-Chair, some things that, or Vice Chair, some things that I would like to see as a critical message and also as a future recommendation is to look at how we evaluate these programs and how we frame and structure our policy decisions to lead to sustainable change. We hear a lot about connected autonomous vehicles, but I would also like to see dashboards and metrics being created with the new use of artificial intelligence and other types of powerful data tools to help us tell our story going forward. The second thing that I would say is around community resilience. So we talk a lot about climate change, but a lot of the planning decisions, past and present, are not designed to help communities, particularly the communities of color, are often impacted more heavily with storms and not having proper drainage systems. The last and final thing is around language access plans and being able to touch more diverse communities to really bring equity across the board. We have an infusion in a lot of neighborhoods of different cultures, and I would like to see that represented, different languages, and to have a transportation system that's understandable by the users who use them. That's all. Thank you.
Hello, Zekwe Rich, New York City DOT. I think something that sort of Vice Chair mentioned before, the idea of public involvement and making sure that it's a meaningful public involvement. I think for far too long, underserved communities have felt they have no voice when these policies are being made in transportation spaces. I mean, historically, transportation is a very white male-dominated space. The laws and policies have been made as such. It's sort of a lot of transportation has been sort of built on the backs of these folks that have been marginalized over years, decades, excuse me. So when we talk about public involvement, to really make sure we mean it, otherwise, you know, we're just going to have sort of the same status quo of federal, state, and even local government thinking that we know more than the community, and we don't. So I think that's a very powerful message. And as my colleague here just mentioned about dashboards and data and metrics, that's sort of my background. Even just going through the website is very text heavy. And Secretary Coates mentioned there's a lot of great things that you're doing. The webpage doesn't really make it seem as such. Having dashboards or visuals or something to really knock home that we're doing some really great work, I think would be really beneficial.
Diana Mendez, HNTB. So we're in a time of change and great opportunity, and there's excitement about creating new things. But I think for sustainability and durability of lasting change, little things matter too. And so while it's important to have the focused effort around equity discussions, we need to be mindful of talking to ourselves and just people who are interested in equity. So to the extent that we can leverage existing frameworks and tweak them in a little way, it's not as exciting as creating great new programs and ambitious initiatives, but we can embed that ambition in series of little actions that are familiar to people that can help everyone understand that there are issues we need to address. I think our greatest impediment is that some people believe they just don't believe there's a problem. Yes, there's a group who's against doing anything about it, but there's a wide range of people who are just, what is equity? Why is this a problem? And so if we can plug in to the networks to which they are already accustomed, the procedures they're already accustomed, and surgically just move those levers, I think we can affect broader, widespread, sustainable change.
Thank you. I see Ms. Wimbush. Yes.
Ebony Wimbush with AMAG. I want to speak to what the department could be doing more of and really talk too about the focus areas and the importance. I represent a constituency where wealth creation is critical, right? And so I think about a quote that talks about you can't change hearts, you change laws, you change allocation of resources, you change the way systems operate, and in doing that, you're going to create more opportunity for people. Minorities and women, they not only deserve to participate in the opportunities to build their communities, we know in doing so, reports tell us, data tells us, that they will hire back into their communities. And that's going to create, obviously, more revenue to drive, public education, public safety, all of those things. And so when we talk about those rolling actionable recommendations, we have to do more of that and looking. There are some really good examples out there of how people are creating contract equity and procurement guidance. And so we must do that, and DOT should be encouraging the roll down of that into state and local dollars. And so that's what I'm looking forward to bringing to the conversation. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair, I'm going to hand it back to you in the interests of keeping us on time.
Okay, I was just discussing with Administrator Marion, because we've had so much coming at you, we want to, since we have you in the room, maybe save some of the things that we might also throw at you here at the end to maybe have a little more conversation. So I see Mr. Winfrey had a point he wanted to make, so I'd love to have you come in. Okay.
Thanks so much, Mr. Secretary. It'll be brief. I think a message I would like for the Secretary and the staff to carry away is a carryover from my corporate days. What gets measured gets done, and the power of the purse that the department has makes them an extremely effective agent of change if they elect to move in that fashion. So being aggressive about the ability to enforce the change that the department wants to see can be effectuated by the allocation of the tremendous resources that the department has at its disposal. So what gets measured gets done. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you. On the virtually, I see Roger with, oh, is there someone else who hasn't spoken before I get to Roger? Anybody? Okay. I think this gentleman here, and then I'll come to you, Roger. Just trying to keep it so everybody gets the chance to say something at least once.
Sounds good. Vince Malone, We Go Public Transit Nashville. I think the message we want to kind of take away is, and I'll be brief, is to the Secretary, let's be transformative. Let's really move the needle. Going back to what Mr. Winfrey was saying, what gets measured really gets the brunt of what things going on. I'm coming from private sector before coming into government, and the really measurable things need to happen are going to happen when we put kind of pen to paper here with some of these new opportunities going forward. Data is going to be our best friend, but more importantly, a lot of the sweat equity we're going to put in between us. I looked at the last question prior to this one, and it had, which of the 4 areas do we really focus on? And when you look at that, we have 24 people in this room that's going to focus. We can split that up. All 4 of those opportunities are very important. But through engagement and education is where we're going to have to really make the efforts and really move this needle forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger, I'm going to turn to you quickly, and then I'm actually going to go around the table and to see if anyone's got, final points that they want to make before we sort of land the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to remind everybody, or something I would like to see the Secretary emphasize, this is not a zero-sum game. Everybody benefits from this. Transportation equity certainly addresses the needs and the rights and the aspirations of overburdened populations, but I don't lose because of that. I'm stronger because of that, and our country is stronger because of that. And I think we need to emphasize that again and again and again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Why don't we start on the end over here? Yeah.
Just final words?
Final word.
Yeah, I would just kind of build on what Mr. Winfrey was saying in terms of being able to have some leverage, and I think specifically related to enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and thinking of ways of going beyond compliance could be done with certain requirements for receiving funding that, from what I've seen so far, hasn't been part of the department's practices.
Great. And it's okay if you don't want to say anything, it's fine, but I just want to make sure everybody has a chance.
Yeah. Going back to, I think someone mentioned earlier, Plessy v. Ferguson, it starts there, and it hit Brown versus Board of Education. It hit a lot of other areas from a civil rights perspective. It didn't happen overnight, and it's going to take us a little time to get there. But in these 9 months, I think with this group here that's assembled, I think we can make it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
My final thoughts are, I'm really excited about the work that we're doing with transportation equity. I really want to see stakeholder engagement from our HBCUs, our MSIs, and our community-based organizations, our faith-based organizations, to really help us inform the work.
Great.
Prashanthi Raman. I wanted to first just reaffirm the initial points of Secretary Buttigieg regarding, equity and really thinking about what that means from an access standpoint, because I think that's foundational to how we really change and innovate and move forward in terms of whether that's opportunity, workforce development, modalities, infrastructure, and whatnot. That really serves as the basis of our conversation. I think the second, which may be a little bit controversial or not necessarily thought of, is when we think about the past, is not to ignore the opposition, but to understand them and then think about how we can change that for future opportunities and future systemic changes. And the final point is that when we think about reimagining the future, and I think this has been made a couple of times, is to really drill down in integrated principles and pragmatic solutions. I think from there that winds up becoming, to your point, Secretary Fox and Chair Fox, a bipartisan debate is where you can think about it from a practical point of everyday people.
I guess what comes to mind is opportunity. This is a great opportunity. We should be bold, we should be aggressive, we should be transformational. That's what comes to mind.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will leave time for my colleagues who haven't spoken. I just want to say thank you so much for pulling this incredible group together and for recognizing that this is the hard work. That really resonates with me. The harder it is, it's because the more we're getting done. Thank you.
Yeah, about the message that for people to take away, and I wrote one. It's most of the transportation projects are treating symptoms rather than the cause. The deep cause is land use, more deeply is people's desire. A truly amazing transportation project is to promote good land use, especially housing, and to shape what people want. And this can in turn improve overall equity beyond transportation. And a few things that I hope to bring to the community's attention is support community-based organizations in public involvement process. The second one is provide guidelines on compensated community participation and promote it nationwide. The third one is identify and address tough challenges in public involvement process that are power imbalance, tokenism, and resistance to border goals. And the final point is about intersectional collaboration on equity with other units like the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Health and Human Services, and Department of Education. A good example is the EV guideline, infrastructure guideline that the DOT developed in partnership with the Department of Energy. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very quickly, two things come to mind that as we work with a cross-section of agencies that we have to seek first to understand and to be understood. And I have to echo that what gets measured gets managed.
Thank you.
Just real quickly, again, thanks so much for the opportunity. Appreciate being here with everyone. I was reflecting on the first question about past, present, and future, and I was just going to say that this committee should be thinking from a temporal perspective because it's impossible to backcast 2023 thinking on pre-civil rights era Eisenhower 1953 decision-making. It won't affect our decisions, I don't believe, but we need to be mindful of the times and how they've changed and how we've progressed. Thank you.
I would just piggyback on the intersectionality and the great work that the department has done. Working across the various agencies, I think continue to do that, not only within the federal agencies, but also taking it down to our local areas. We need to just make sure that people understand, how we are dependent of each other. When I think about health, housing, right, education, academia, community colleges, we just need to make sure that everyone understands that we're in it together.
Just really briefly, thank you for the opportunity to serve with these great minds here in the room. Look forward to representing. I think about what Secretary Buttigieg said in terms of arming people with facts and making sure that this report is grounded in what is happening today and forward-looking. And so looking forward to bringing those real-life, real-time, actionable solutions forward. Thank you.
Two really quick points. First is I don't see any youth representation at the table. I don't see children. And when we think about children, we think about the people who are most likely to be injured, criminalized, and victimized while traveling. So I hope that we can reflect on that before our next meeting and see if there's a youth contingency that we can engage through this work. Secondly, I'm thinking about the inherent nature of marginality and how folks become marginalized and what disparities derive from. Those things happen because we've been focusing on practicality for a long time. If we're looking to do something that benefits the greater good, then the people at the margins will continue to not benefit from the decisions that we make. So while I know that we have a goal of reaching actionable recommendations, I hope that there's some wiggle room and some space at the table to think about what doesn't appear to be actionable immediately, but what has to be, what must be pursued if our goals are really our goals.
Charles Brown, Equitable Cities. I'm not one for wasting words. Let's work.
Hi, Camille Williams, Transportation Diversity Council. What I hope that we do in this process is really give power back to the people, go into the communities, and you mentioned the why, finding out the why. Find out the why from the public, that we are developing this process and this program to serve. And I hope that there are opportunities for a listening tour or for us to go into our respective communities and find out what they need and have their information, their input inform this process as we go through it over this next 9 months or so. Thank you.
Zeke Rich, I think that racial equity is the origin of all equity work. And if we're not getting uncomfortable doing this work, then we're not doing enough.
Priya Sarthy Jones. I just want to lift up the communities that bear the burdens of the most inequities in all of these systems: health and human services, housing, transportation, the criminal justice system, so on and so forth. They are all the same. And so to not decompartmentalize this work, because it is all related to each other, it is a part of a much larger web, and that our dialogue reflects that interconnectivity in identifying both our direction, but also bringing more conversation into the fold. Thank you.
Diana Mendez, we have a great opportunity in front of us. We have a lot of work to do. Time is of the essence. There are people out there every day in communities and agencies doing incredible things to advance equity. Let's find them. Let's get their stories out. Let's let them inspire others and get going on those rolling recommendations while we work towards the whole. And I think Dr. Martin Luther King said it best when he said, you don't have to see the whole staircase to take the first step.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. And I'd like to thank Lisa Lynn and Tanya for guiding us through that portion of the conversation. There were elements of our, Sorry, virtual, I forgot. There might have been some parting shots. I see children represented now. So that's pretty good.
Well played.
Any parting shots from the virtual team?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Veronica Davis, the City of Houston. I think we have a really great opportunity in front of us, particularly as someone representing a person that implements projects. You know, my big hope that as we come out of this, it's as we have tangible steps, it's even just ways to implement projects faster. There's a lot of money under the bipartisan infrastructure law towards safety, towards areas of persistent poverty, and we need to get shovels in the ground so that we can truly see the impact. And those are broader things that overall help the process. So that is one thing just from a practical standpoint I would like to see, because we want to get these projects done that will have positive impacts to communities consistently harmed.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, Roger.
Andrea?
Sure. Thank you. I'll keep it brief, but as I hold the future in my lap, I am optimistic that we can do really important work together to think about what it means to create an equitable transportation future for all, including the most marginalized populations, including humans that are not bipeds, either by phase of development or because of disability. And I am so grateful to be joining all of you in this important work. And so is my daughter, apparently.
Miss Charis, Roger. Building on what my friend Greg Winfrey said, a phrase I learned from the Minister of Transport in New Zealand is that we measure what we treasure. I treasure justice, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you to help achieve that.
Thank you so much. Madam Vice Chair.
I'm going to close with where we started, which is a level of gratitude for both those who have come before to help to clear the pathway for us, and also what we're about to do to pave the road ahead. We are living history in a lot of ways, and I'm excited by the invitation, and I hope that you all will join us as we really think about the recommendations, the solutions that will help us meet this moment for the greater future. Thank you.
Thank you. The two items I don't think we got to today are the sort of community agreements, which you will get emailed to you, and we can deal with that at the top of our next meeting, as well as some conversation about public engagement. I know we got a question from the public today about that. We'll take that at the top of the next agenda as well. I'm really thankful to all of you for your investment of time. This is going to be fun. It's going to be hard, but it's going to be really important and hopefully impactful to the country. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.